welcoming you back.
Peaceful protests they are, or at least should be, as American as apple pie. A First Amendment right, freedom of speech.
But there appears to be a bit of a double standard at work today, a difference between those protesting for so-called conservative value causes and for those protesting civil rights causes. The issue becomes this: is it a question of ideals in this country or an indicator of worsening race relations in America? And here to talk about it is Eric Claville, who's the director of the Center for African American Public Policy at Norfolk State University. Welcome back, sir.
Thank you very much. Glad to be back with you.
Wonderful. Well, let's start with talking about the state of race relations in America. What are your thoughts?
Well, currently, as we can see by all of the high-profile events that have taken place between police and African Americans, whether they be armed or mostly have not been armed, and also private citizens who are white taking the law into their own hands in order to bring so-called justice because of what they perceive are being black offenders. What we're finding now is that in the age of the Trump era, especially during the pandemic, we see that there are a lot of these events that we thought we, as an American society, kind of understood and we're working toward progress. We see that we're taking steps back and repeating history all over again.
Let me ask you how troubled you are to see how protests by the so-called right wing in America are embraced by the government. For example, the people that showed up with guns and kind of took over the Michigan State Capitol. One of the elected officials, a black woman, so afraid that she had to have somebody to escort her in. And the other being a protest over an unarmed black man in Minneapolis being killed. And that protest is met with tear gas and rubber bullets and flashbangs.
Right. You bring up a very interesting contrast of these protests. We see since the lockdown, we see that our president and other right-wing groups have incited individuals to take arms in order to open up their states back up, even in the midst of a medical and disease pandemic. These individuals are strapped in military gear. They have assault rifles, and you see the police there containing them, right? So, quote unquote, peaceful, but these are individuals that are meant to intimidate, and they're not just going anywhere. They're going to the state capitals where the lawmakers are making these laws. We saw it here in Richmond, we saw it in Charlottesville, and more specifically, you mentioned Michigan. In Michigan, they were allowed to go inside of the Capitol building and almost made it to the floor of the House in order to intimidate lawmakers to open up their societies so that they could live, quote unquote, free lives. We also see it where individuals are walking the street. And this contrast where peaceful protests are met with tear gas, the militarization of police in the street, in armored cars, is being taken note of in American society, but more specifically African American society, to show that there is a divide, there is a misunderstanding, that America, there are two different types of Americas. There's a white America with privilege, and there's a black America, a brown America with limited or no privilege when it comes to certain actions.
Well, how responsible is the current administration for this current state of racial affairs?
Well, it doesn't help that our current administration tweets out information that is misleading, that is false, and to the point where individuals start to believe it. It starts to take a life of its own. As a matter of fact, Twitter just recently on yesterday put a fact check under the president's remarks. This was the first time they've done this, but it was met with anger from the president as well. But they did that because they saw the danger of the false information and the lies that are perpetuated, unfortunately, by our administration, whether it be in peaceful times and more specifically in times of distress, such as we are in now in our country.
And perhaps this is more of a statement than a question, but somebody a lot smarter than me once wrote that there's nothing wrong with black people in this country than getting rid of racism can't fix. Would you agree with that?
Well, that's kind of a loaded statement. At this point, I'll say this, that African Americans and other persons of color have always known that racism has existed in our country. We've always known that there's been a second tier to individuals of color. It is time now for white Americans to step up to the plate and for them to do what is right when they see acts of racism, discrimination, speak up. The good officers, the good executives, the good people in the communities and the neighborhoods, it's time for them to speak up and do the right thing.
Well, none of us are perfect. You're absolutely right about that. But Eric Claville, thank you so much, Director for the Center for African American Public Policy at Norfolk State University. Thank you for the enlightenment, sir.
Thank you.